And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
Attention! Something is disappearing from the sky over America, and it's not clouds. Right now, as you watch this video, international airlines are quietly leaving the United States. Flight after flight, route after route, cities across the country are losing their direct flights to Europe, Asia, and South America without a single word of farewell. Stewart Airport in New York, once a proud international hub, now stands empty, with closed gates and silent conveyor belts. In Tampa, terminals that cost millions of dollars to build are shutting down, and local hotels are counting empty rooms as the tourists who once spent billions of dollars in these cities are no longer coming. You may not notice it right away, but every flight that disappears leaves a deep mark, weakening the economy, taking away jobs and destroying the plans of those who once built their future on international traffic.
There's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
This is not just a seasonal downturn or temporary industry problems, but a quiet collapse caused by America's decline as an attractive destination for global carriers. Fares, visa delays, a strong dollar, and rising costs are driving away even those who for decades considered the US a gold mine. Turkish Airlines, Chinese carriers, even giants like Lufthansa and Air France have all turned their planes around, choosing Jakarta over New York, Nairobi over Miami, and Mumbai over Chicago. They are going where the middle class is growing, where the rules of the game are stable, where passengers are willing to spend money, and where they don't have to pay an extra 25% for spare parts due to new tariffs.
After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
America is not just losing passengers, it is losing influence. When planes stop flying, business partners look for new locations, students choose other countries to study in, and international conferences move to places that are easier to get to. Have you ever heard of an airline quietly canceling a flight without any announcement? That's what's happening now. No press releases, no big headlines. One day people show up at the airport, and their flight no longer exists, and with it disappears the flow of tourists, restaurant revenues, taxes, hotels, and jobs.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
According to industry estimates, by the end of this year, the US could lose another 20% of its international traffic, and airfares will rise by 10 to 15%. This means that America could become a fly-by zone, a place that planes will fly over but no longer fly to. And while this trend may seem insignificant today, in 5 years it could become a point of no return when airlines finally rearrange their routes and America loses its status as the center of international aviation.
That's a 10. That's a good one. Yeah.
Stay with us to find out what hidden mechanisms are behind this mass exodus, how it could affect every American city, and why the departure of airlines today is more than just cancelled flights. It is a signal of how the world is changing, in which America is no longer the center of gravity.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, you know, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10%, 10% is really, first of all, 10% when you collect it is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in,
$84 billion in losses. That figure sounds like a blow to the aviation industry, which just a few years ago was considered a symbol of global mobility and American influence. But today, that figure is just the beginning of a more frightening story that is unfolding right now in the skies above America.
US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Losses that seemed temporary yesterday are turning into a black hole, swallowing flights, jobs, and entire cities that built their businesses on international passenger traffic. United is cutting 36,000 jobs. But behind the dry figures in press releases lie the fates of people who yesterday thought that a stable job in aviation was their ticket to a peaceful life. Mechanics who have only recently completed expensive retraining courses, flight attendants who took out mortgages on their homes, counting on stable flights, pilots who dreamed of long transatlantic flights, all of them are now receiving layoff notices, and with them, the hopes of thousands of families are collapsing. Houses with for sale signs are starting to appear even in neighborhoods that were considered upscale. As laid-off aviation industry employees can no longer afford their mortgages.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Something is truly disappearing from the skies above America, and it's not clouds. Flights are disappearing, logistics chains are disappearing, and with them, international confidence in the US as an aviation hub is disappearing. International giants such as Play Airlines, Air Canada, Lufthansa, and Air France have begun quietly and methodically removing their planes from UPSCU, like chess players who have calculated their opponent's next move and already understand that it is time to leave. This is not hysteria or a reaction to a political crisis. It is cold calculation. Over the past week, Air France has cut 2 more flights from Paris to Seattle and Miami, citing adjustments to demand. But behind this soulless expression lies the fact that the number of passengers wanting to fly to the US has plummeted to a level that no one predicted, even in the most pessimistic scenarios. And if you think this is still just a post-COVID wave, here's the new reality. Between January and October 2025, the number of seats available on flights between Canada and the US fell by more than 320,000. This is not a seasonal adjustment. This is a systemic rollback. Passenger traffic is disappearing. Flights are being cancelled. And this disappearance is being followed by a real silence in terminals where, until recently, there was a mixture of languages, where hundreds of passengers hurried to their gates, where coffee was sold non-stop from morning to night. Today, these terminals are empty, the conveyor belts have stopped, and shops and restaurants in the departure area are slowly closing their doors, losing revenue day after day.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
The hidden reason for this outcome is the new tariffs that the Trump administration introduced with loud slogans about protecting national interests. 25% on Canada and Mexico, 20% on China, 10% on other countries. It would seem that aviation should not have been hit hard, as these tariffs are primarily aimed at goods. But the reality is more complicated. Anyone who works in aviation knows that every part of an aircraft, every bolt, every navigation system requires constant maintenance and replacement, and any part imported from Canada or Germany now costs more. The British press claimed that a new batch of brake systems purchased by Air Canada to service its airliners cost them 18% more precisely because of the tariffs, which means that every flight to the US is another step towards losses.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
But there is another, less obvious detail. A source at one of the major carriers, who preferred to remain anonymous, told reporters that in addition to official tariffs, companies faced hidden taxes associated with the need to reorganize spare parts logistics due to customs delays and inspections, which tripled after the introduction of new security measures. Although no one is talking about it officially, everyone in the industry understands that flying to America is becoming unprofitable. One example cited is the case of Lufthansa, when 2 flights to New York were cancelled due to a delay in the delivery of pressure sensors from a factory in Toronto, resulting in losses of more than $750,000 in a single day, including ticket refunds and hotel costs for passengers. These losses will never make it into press releases, but they become an argument for airline executives when they decide to close a route. At the same time, Trump continues to claim in his speeches that the new tariffs are bringing jobs back to America, but behind the scenes, processes are underway that are leading to the opposite result. The more tariffs there are, the more expensive it is to maintain aircraft, the greater the losses for airlines, and the less they want to fly to the US. Foreign airlines are already considering route reductions not as a temporary measure, but as a long-term strategy, as Asia and Africa are growing 2 to 3 times faster than the US market. Emirates has plans to open 14 new routes in Africa over the next year, while closing 2 routes in the US, which have not yet been publicly announced. Turkish Airlines has said behind the scenes that it is prepared to completely abandon flights to 2 US cities in 2026 if the tariffs are not abolished. Tariffs are not just numbers in reports, they are a factor that kills trust, kills investment, and kills the desire to work with the US. And while Trump continues to spout slogans, in the real economy, a massive exodus of aircraft from American skies is quietly and imperceptibly taking place. This exodus could become irreversible in a few months if there is no policy review and no attempt to restore confidence in the US as a global aviation hub. When planes disappear from the horizon, so does life in cities that have grown accustomed to the roar of engines, the rumble of landing planes, and the flow of people with suitcases full of plans and hopes. This is exactly what is happening today in dozens of American cities that once considered their international airport their main asset and source of economic growth. Buffalo, Tampa, Seattle, and dozens of other places on the map where terminals were expanded at a cost of millions of dollars now stand half empty. In hotels near airports, only a few windows are lit, as the international tourists who provided year-round occupancy have disappeared. In cafes that used to sell coffee to thousands of passengers every day, employees now spend more time on the phone than preparing orders. Taxis sit idle at taxi ranks, and dispatchers increasingly hear, "No fares on the phone." These cities built their future on the assumption that the global flow of people would always grow, because it seemed that the world was moving toward greater unity and mobility. But today, that assumption is crumbling because planes have stopped flying here. and those that are still flying are preparing to turn toward other continents. Stewart in New York is one of the symbols of this new silence. When Play Airlines cancelled its last flight to Iceland, there were no press conferences or farewell speeches at the airport. One day, the baggage carousels simply stopped, and the employees who had been greeting and seeing off international passengers for years were faced with a choice: wait until management decides what to do with the empty halls, or look for work, which is becoming increasingly scarce in the region. This silence can be measured in numbers. Retail sales in airport areas have fallen by more than 12%, and hotels near airports are reporting a 30 to 40% drop in occupancy compared to last year. For cities that collected taxes on every cup of coffee sold, every night in a hotel, and every taxi ride, this means a direct hole in the budget that even seasonal domestic tourists coming to the beaches in the summer cannot fill. But this is not just an economic blow, it is a psychological blow that destroys the identity of cities. Tampa built its international image as a sunny gateway for European tourists. Buffalo prided itself on its role as a crossroads with Canada, and Seattle attracted business conferences thanks to convenient flights from Asia. Now all these stories are losing their meaning. Tourism campaigns launched under slogans such as "We welcome guests from all over the world" no longer work because planes carrying guests have stopped flying. One hotel chain in Tampa said, in a report to investors, that the share of international guests fell from 38% to 12% in the first 8 months of 2025, resulting in losses of more than $9 million in a single season. The scariest thing about this process is that it is happening quietly. There are no protests, no debates in the media, just planes that stop flying, and with them, the money that foreign tourists leave behind disappears. City authorities are still trying to find a way out by cutting taxes for local businesses and trying to lure domestic tourists, but these efforts are like trying to plug a hole in a dam with your finger. International passengers spend on average 3 times more than domestic passengers, and their absence is causing not just a drop in revenue, but the collapse of entire business models. Some shop and cafe owners at airports said they were forced to sell their equipment for next to nothing to pay off rent after their daily revenue fell by half. At the same time, while America is losing flights and passengers, other regions of the world are beginning to gather this scattered audience like a magnet attracts metal shavings. Turkey is opening new routes from Istanbul to Jakarta, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, creating new transit hubs that were previously served by New York. Emirates is increasing the frequency of flights to Southeast Asia, where a growing middle class is filling planes by buying tickets months in advance, while flights to the US are increasingly leaving half empty. Chinese airlines are cutting flights to Los Angeles and Chicago, while launching new routes to Nairobi, Manila, and Lima, where demand is growing even amid global instability. These moves are not random experiments, but a clear strategy. Turkish Airlines has ordered new narrow-body aircraft this year, specifically designed for frequent flights to Asia and Africa, confirming its long-term reorientation plans. Emirates has opened a new maintenance base in Singapore to reduce costs and speed up fleet maintenance in a region where they predict passenger traffic will grow by 18% per year. American airports are losing their importance as transfer points, as passengers prefer to fly directly to Europe or Asia, bypassing the US. This is also hitting business. International conferences are increasingly being held in Dubai and Jakarta. Students from India and China are choosing universities in Europe, where visa policies are more lenient, and international corporations are downsizing their offices in US cities as there are no longer direct flights that allow top managers to fly in quickly for meetings. And all this is happening without loud headlines, without hysteria and noise. Planes are simply flying away to places with stable rules and growing demand, leaving behind empty terminals and cities that are losing hope for recovery. This global shift cannot be reversed quickly. Lowering ticket prices alone will not be enough to bring the planes back. Long-term guarantees of stability, a review of fare policies, and active engagement with international carriers that currently view America as an expensive and problematic destination are needed. But until that happens, planes will continue to disappear from American skies every day, taking with them millions of dollars, jobs, and the invisible threads that connected the US to the world. The silence in terminals and empty runways at American airports are not just a picture. They are a symbol of the United States losing its global relevance, which was so loudly proclaimed just a few years ago. When planes stop flying, business people stop coming, students disappear, and the flow of investment and cultural exchange decreases. Conferences that used to book halls in New York are now moving to Singapore and Dubai, and business summits that were recently held in Chicago are being moved to Istanbul and Jakarta, where there are convenient direct flights and stable visa rules. Tourist offices in cities that not long ago printed colorful brochures saying, "Welcome to America," are now cutting their budgets because there is no demand, and every empty seat on a plane is not just the loss of one passenger, but lost tax revenue, unpurchased coffee, an unbooked tour, an unhanded business card at a conference, and an unopened account at a local bank.